Right now, we are joined by a political candidate in our studios. This next gentleman reached out to me some months ago, expressing his interest to come into studio to talk to you about his candidacy for a Senate seat. Being that he was not on the primary ballot and in an effort to avoid confusion, I asked John to wait until after the primary election cycle, and then we could, for those of you unfamiliar with his candidacy, introduce him to the listening audience, and we're doing that today. His name is John Gentry. He is running for State Senate in District 18. That's right, against Farrell Hale, a gentleman that we've talked about quite a bit on this radio show, who I call Feckless Farrell because Farrell will not come on with me and present himself to the listening audience. But John Gentry will, and he joins us in studio today. John, thank you for being on with us. Good afternoon.
Thanks for having me here, Matt.
Tell folks who are unfamiliar with you, your backstory, your history, a little about yourself, and what led you to offer yourself to public service.
Yeah, a little bit about myself. I was a certified public accountant for more than 20 years. Before that, I served 8 years as a Force Recon Marine. That's like a Navy SEAL, but for the Marine Corps. And for about almost the last decade, I've been fighting corruption in our state government. And I've already gotten rid of almost a dozen corrupt judges. And I've also been taking stand against the corruption that's going on in our legislative houses. What's happening in the Tennessee General Assembly is they're using the lawmaking powers that we delegated to them, and they're misusing that power to create financial advantage for special interests out there. Literally 99% of the legislation is special interest. And if they're writing legislation so that, banking, insurance, real estate can make a little more money, as a CPA, it's common sense to me. If somebody's making money, it's costing somebody somewhere. And that's usually us, the people, that are having to pay increased costs as a result of a lot of special interest legislation down there. So the difference with me, I know one vote in the Senate isn't going to matter. The majority of them, they're going to get done what they want to get done. The difference for me is I stand on our state constitution. I literally know our state constitution better than anyone in this entire country because I wrote and published a book explaining our state constitution. But the heart of my work, and I look forward to talking about this, is teaching people how to take back control of our government, how to have a direct voice in our government through rights in our state constitution.
So why are you offering yourself up specifically to District number 18?
I became aware of corruption in our government through court proceedings in Sumner County, and I fought that corruption all the way through to the Supreme Court of the United States. I sued judges and attorneys and took 2 cases to the Supreme Court of the United States. I couldn't even get heard because the corruption protects the corruption. Mm-hmm. And so then I started learning about, well, if I can't go to the judiciary, what about the legislative branch? And then I learned how corrupt the legislative branches are. And through the years, going to various law enforcement agencies, state and federal, about these crimes that are being committed by our government, I found government isn't going to fix itself. It's going to have to come from the people. The people are going to have to learn how to take back control of our government. And the solutions for that are in our state constitution. So I use my campaign as a way to educate people, teach them about the protections that the founders put in our state constitution and how we have a direct voice and how we start to take down this corruption in our government.
You're talking my language, John, because I do believe that government's natural state is to grow and to absorb responsibilities and power that it was not designed to absorb nor to take up. And sadly, the fight against that growth and encroachment, we see it more at the federal level because they're allowed to borrow against the good faith and credit. And we see what happens there, $36 trillion later now. But it happens in state government as well, where the authorities vested in the local communities somehow get absorbed into Nashville, and it happens in a way that the citizenry doesn't typically notice.
Yeah, and it's our state legislatures that very often fill positions in Congress. They're coming out of our General Assembly. They learn that corrupt process, serving as state legislators down there. I ask a lot of people I talk to, is it a fair statement that we all pretty much agree we have a big problem with corruption in government? And I have yet to have one single person say, no, we don't have a problem with corruption in government. we all recognize the problem, and there is not a single other candidate who even acknowledges that we have a problem with corruption in our government. So it has to be true that these other candidates are incredibly stupid and don't realize we have a problem with corruption in government, or they're a part of it, either actively participating or turning a blind eye to it. And I do not accept this corruption that is going on in our state government, and I know how to fix the problem. And the solution to the problem is educating the people about how to take back control of our government.
Now, when you say corruption in government, that's a big phrase. That's a big concept. Boil it down for us and help us understand what you mean when you say that the politicians in Nashville, in the state legislature, are corrupt.
That's a good point. And when I talk about corruption, I just don't make vague allegations. I'm very specific about it. In 1953, they created the Tennessee Code Commission, and they put the Chief Justice of the Tennessee Supreme Court is the chair of that. 1971, they created the Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct, and it used to be all judges, almost a dozen. Now it has 8 new judges in there. Our state constitution prohibits judges from holding any other office, period. You're a judge, that's all you get to be, because the founders knew you give a judge a second office, it's always going to lead to corruption. And
certainly a conflict of interest. Well, if nothing else.
It's strictly about protecting corruption. That's why they put that provision in there. And as a result of that, our judicial branch is completely unchecked branch of government, accountable to no one. They are literally above the law, and they're destroying lives in our courtroom. In the Tennessee Code Commission, they actually deceive what are the public acts passed by the General Assembly, the way that they compile that into Tennessee Code annotated. And a huge violation of separation of powers. When I talk about legislative corruption, like, for example, there was a strategic lawsuit against public participation bill that I went and testified against a couple of years. A lot of this legislation, when you actually look at the legislation, not the caption, the caption is the pretended legislation. They tell you, this is what it's supposed to be for. When you get into the language, there is no good public purpose to that legislation, and it is clear that they're creating financial advantage. They're creating immunities for government officials so that they can't be held accountable. There's incredible amounts of that kind of legislation going on down there, and there's nobody talking about it except for John Gentry.
So, and I just want to dig a little bit deeper into what you're discussing, because when you say the word corruption, it indicates that someone is doing something either underhandedly or illegally. And what you just described, it occurs to me, is a group of people doing things in broad daylight that go against the fabric of the founding of the state of Tennessee, go against the Constitution of the state of Tennessee. So are they? I mean, is corruption? I don't want to use your word against you, but is corruption the wrong word to use? I mean, isn't it our responsibility as a people to recognize when the elected officials that we put in office are using their position to expand and broaden the power of the office?
Well, you
understand my question?
Yeah, the founders called it. You're asking, is this unfair to call this corruption?
Right.
No, absolutely, it is corruption. The founders called it tyranny and oppression, but it is exactly the same thing. Now, in our Declaration of Independence, it was a grievance for altering fundamentally our forms of government. That was one of the grounds for declaring independence and separating from England. When our Tennessee legislature created the Code Commission and the Board of Judicial Conduct, they put judges in prohibited offices. Mm-hmm. They unlawfully altered our form of government. But this gets back to the people. We are not taught our state constitution at any grade, at any level, in any school. And so the people don't know that we have a problem. The legislature that created them in 1953 and 1971 didn't know their state constitution, didn't know that they were acting in violation of it. But when it gets down to it, every bit of corruption that is going on in this state it boils down, when you peel back all the layers, it's judges holding prohibited offices in the Code Commission and the Board of Judicial Conduct.
Well, and you are running for state senate, then why? To correct that issue? Is that your primary goal? Absolutely.
As a citizen, I testified in 2 legislative committee hearings against the Board of Judicial Conduct. Mm-hmm. And I publicly accused a sitting senator and a judge of federal crime in front of 9 senators and 16 representatives because
how'd they take that, John? I bet
they're not in office anymore.
Oh, well, they're good for you.
And because they were trying to prevent my testimony, Senator Pody, very good senator, have my greatest respect.
That's my senator, Mark Pody. Love that man.
He heard my testimony. He turned around during legislative committee hearing, and he asked the legislative committee attorney, he said, are we in any way in violation of the state constitution with judges holding prohibited offices? And the legislative attorney, I'll get back to you on that. I have challenged every senator, representative, the attorney general, anyone to prove me wrong, and I'll shut up about it. Well, and nobody will step up.
You kind of answered one of my questions. John Gentry, our guest, by the way, is an independent candidate for State Senate District number 18, currently held by Farrell Hale. So you mentioned Mark Pody. I was going to ask you, because at the beginning, when you were opening up on this line of conversation, you said that, and if I misheard you, correct me, that the vast majority of people in public office in the state of Tennessee are either in on it or useful idiots.
Exactly. I mean,
well, which is Mark Pody?
Mark Pody, well, actually, I think Mark Pody stands against that. You know, when it's brought to his attention, he voted no in that hearing.
Are there others that you would look to and say these are folks that get it in elected office?
Absolutely. There are several of them down there.
So you would have allies, in other words.
Absolutely. And I build allies down there. I spent a lot of time working with legislators down there as a citizen. I'm already doing the job.
120 Supertalk 99.7 WT and John Gentry with us for another good segment, good conversation to begin our visit together. You can find out more about John at wethepeoplev50.com. That's his website. A little bit clunky, so I'm just going to read it out. It's We the People, like you would expect it, V, the letter V, and then 50, the number 50.com for more information about John. We'll be back in just a moment on Supertalk. We have 5 more minutes of good conversation with John Gentry, who is running for state senate as an independent candidate. I was just talking to you off air, and folks, you just need to look for the name John Gentry because there'll be some other names on your ballot in November, in addition to the incumbent Farrell Hale. Is Farrell, just talk to me about how he is a part of the problem specifically to the Senate district that you're running for and beyond, because this is I don't want to say it's a hard concept for people to grasp that government's grown beyond its constitutional duty and boundaries, but that's a hard one for people to grab onto maybe locally. Are there local issues that are consistent with your message, your mission statement regarding the growth of government that you want to talk about too, John?
You know, there's a lot of stuff that Hale's primary challenger, Chris Spencer, put out there that Hale is basically a rhino. Mm-hmm. I actually went down and specifically testified against legislation sponsored by Hale, which was to confound FOIA requests to our state government. So Senator Hale was actually sponsored legislation that would make it much more difficult for citizens to actually have transparency through FOIA requests. And that's protecting the corruption in government directly. And then Senator Hale is well aware. I've emailed him several times about judges holding prohibited offices, and he won't even respond to my emails. And so I would say that Senator Hale is a traitor to his oath to support the Constitution of this state.
Well, there's strong words, but you know, I requested on several different occasions through his cell phone and through his campaign audience with Senator Hale, and he just ignores me.
There's a state law, and I'm pretty sure they enacted this to try to get me. There's a new state law that if you are a candidate and you make a false statement about another candidate, it's a misdemeanor crime with 30 days in jail, which is, you know, that's a civil tort, libel or slander. But now they've actually turned it into a crime if you're a candidate. And so I know this law, and I don't make these statements lightly. Farrell Hale is a traitor to his oath to support the Constitution of this state.
And you challenge, it sounds like you're almost challenging Farrell to dispute that.
Absolutely. And I, any district attorney, come after me and try to prosecute me for this, because I'd be happy to prove it in a court of law. You consider yourself a constitutional conservative? Absolutely, I'm conservative, and my work is not so much about party politics. I mean, absolutely, of course, I'm going to vote conservative. The job of being a senator, it really should be stupid simple. It really ought to be. You do what the majority of the people who elected you want you to do. You do what the Constitution allows and nothing more, and you do what's morally the right thing. And there shouldn't be anything hard about that. I don't think our senators and representatives have actually read our state constitution.
I would agree with that.
That they swore an oath to. Because if they did, they would know that a lot of legislation that's going through our General Assembly is repugnant to our state constitution.
So this is the reason that you run as an independent? I mean, obviously there's some...
No, the reason I'm running as an independent, the Republican Party controls who's on the ballot by disqualifying people they don't like. And because I've been fighting corruption in our government for almost a decade, I figure they're going to make up some excuse and disqualify me. Now, they just put in a new bylaw. If you sue the Republican Party, you can't run as a Republican for 10 years. So if I'm wrongfully disqualified, I can't even defend myself in a court of law. And under state law, if you're disqualified from a primary, statutory law prohibits you from switching to an independent and running in the general election. They're stacking the deck, Matt. And so, they just disqualified 14 Republicans across the state before the August primary. I'm a little bit smarter than those guys. I learned the rules before I jump in the game.
You got a shot at this, John?
Absolutely, I do. I have reached out to thousands, tens of thousands of people in Sumner County, one-on-one. I have been working hard since January, and I strongly believe that Farrell Hale is going to get a big surprise come November.
I'm running late. I've only got about 30 seconds left, but I ask you this. I mean, Chris Spencer ran a spirited primary campaign. I understand that he's smarting after his defeat, but have you reached out to him? Have you talked to Chris at all? Would you talk to Chris about?
I did, and I'm actually quite surprised that Chris Spencer isn't supporting me, because I was going to vote for Chris Spencer myself before I decided to run for this seat. I stand for this, a lot of the same things, almost all of the same things that Chris Spencer stands for.
Well, give him some time. I mean, maybe I know that they're hurting. That camp is hurting. I heard from a number of their folks, and maybe they'll come around to a Gentry candidacy come November.
I welcome anybody to take time, learn about the work. I will embrace even these traitors that we have down there. My arms are wide open as soon as we're ready to come back into compliance with our founding documents.
WeThePeopleV50.com, best way to reach you.
Yeah. If you just internet search John Gentry, Tennessee, Gentry, you'll find me. There's a lot of stuff out there.
John, good to meet you. We'll have you back on.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
There's John Gentry.